Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on growing great leaders. Hopefully that's what you're looking for. If it is what you're looking for, you're in exactly the right place. I'm going to give folks a couple of seconds here to get in the room before we launch things off. Hello from North Carolina. So Lenny's got the right idea. If you want to find the chat window and tell us where you're joining us from this afternoon, that would be great. Let's see. I am just southeast of Raleigh in Wilson County, which is about halfway between Raleigh and Greenville towards the coast, if anyone knows the geography. See some other North Carolina, Vancouver, Chicago, Richmond, up the road in Cary, up the road from me anyway. Very good. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Brandon Hall Group's webinar on growing great leaders. Integrated leadership development in an experience economy. I am Matt Pittman and principal analyst with Brandon Hall Group, and I am pleased to have with me this afternoon Katie Sheketoff from Marriott International. Katie is the Director of Global Leadership Development, where she supports global talent initiatives that develop leaders at all levels. Having worked in many countries around the world, Katie has dedicated her career to helping both corporate and nonprofit organizations transcend traditional classroom learning and amplify their people's potential and impact through curiosity, courage, and connectedness. Katie, it's great to have you this afternoon. Look forward to our conversation. Also joined by Jacob Nicolau, who is the head of product and customer marketing at novoed, a social and collaborative learning platform for building deep organizational capabilities at scale. He's spent his career dedicated to driving research, market insight, business intelligence, and go-to-market strategy for businesses focused on providing transformative technology solutions to the Fortune 1000. His career spanned operating roles in data platforms, virtual reality, and cohort-based learning and corporate academy building. His writing and research reports with industry analysts have been published and cited by Harvard Business Review, Forbes, Fast Company, and others. Jacob, thank you for being here as well. We are very grateful to today's webinar sponsor, novoed. Novoed was founded at Stanford's Social Algorithms Lab in 2012. It is a capability building platform that uses social and collaborative learning to drive alignment, performance, and mobility at scale. Cohort-based experiences, novoed taps into collective wisdom, placing each learner at the center of perspective, application, and expertise. Large enterprises such as 3M, GE, Nestle, and Marriott partner with novoed to accelerate their critical initiatives and reconnect teams through learning that is felt, experienced, and swiftly transformed into impact. Visit www.novoed.com to learn more about our sponsor today. If you're new to Brandon Hall Group webinars or new to Brandon Hall Group, we work with organizations in a number of ways to promote and support human capital management excellence across the entire spectrum. We have a research membership, a preferred provider program. We're probably best known for our excellence awards in both technology and human capital management practice. And we've recently added education technology to that mix as well. At the heart of what we do at Brandon Hall Group, though, is our research, and we encourage and invite you to participate in our ongoing research efforts. We have a couple of surveys open right now around skill building and performance management. You can find those at our website and by clicking Open Surveys in the upper right-hand corner of that homepage. And last but not least, we are in Zoom today. And if you're familiar with the Zoom platform, you know there is the chat that is open to you. We've already gotten that going. So thank you guys for that. There is also a Q&A panel. We encourage you to use that to submit your questions as we go through today. And Katie and Jacob and I will be glad to engage with those questions as we go through. And there is also that raise hand feature that is available. We sometimes will use that to take informal polls. So let me know you found that, find that raise hand button and just click it so I can see that you guys know how to find it if we need it. Excellent. See those hands. Very good. So why are we talking about leadership development and uh, driving consistency and how to build these better learning experiences for our leaders? Well, in a recent study that Brandon Hall Group conducted, looking at ways to improve the employee experience, um, we found that overwhelmingly an investment in employee learning and development programs to enhance skills and knowledge was the top initiative that companies are engaging in. And there are others that are a part of that, but learning is still at the heart of what companies are trying to do to build and improve and drive a positive employee experience. And it's interesting because leadership development has been evolving over the last few years. 70% of organizations in a study from last year talked about the need for leadership development training to be available to every employee, regardless of role or title. And 58% said that they are working on building a culture of continuous leader learning. And it's a commendable aspiration. It sounds great, but we have a long road ahead of us because only 35% of those same organizations were offering some sort of leadership development to all employees at that same time. And part of knowing that we want to invest in leadership development and build these unique positive experiences is when we look at how do we know if our leadership development is being effective? How do we know if our employee experience is being effective? The metrics that we look at are directly reflective of the relationship of the leader to their teammates. Employee engagement, 95% would use that metric to measure results. 85% would use employee performance. 85% are looking at retention of top talent. Those three metrics are all heavily influenced and impacted by leaders and their role within their teams. And there's some other important data points here. Among the top initiative to improve the employee experience, 47% are introducing leadership development program within that focus on employee training and development. And supportive management team and recognition from management rate very high, very important in terms of their impact on the positive employee experience. And the challenges that we run into in delivering personalized learning and creating that positive employee experience, managers don't play a large enough role in learning was the number one challenge. Culture that is built on event-based learning. And in the last 3 years, we've had to do so much adjustment to that approach and to that philosophy, and not having the right technology in place to support our learning and development. And when we focus on that, and you're going to hear this great story from Katie and Jacob, what we find is that employees experience a greater confidence in performing work, which opens up new growth opportunities, betterment as a person, both personally and professionally, and contributions are more valued and more respected, all very positive impacts. And with that, I want to invite Katie to tell us her story.
Thanks, Matt. I really appreciate that. And it's so lovely to be here with you all. Really excited to share what we've been working on at Marriott and just get some perspective from all of you as well. So just to set a little bit of context of where this comes up for us, obviously over the last 3 years, but really over the last 20, 30, our business environment and our culture has really been shifting, and it's been shifting more rapidly than ever before. Obviously in hospitality, we were hugely affected by the pandemic, but it's not just the pandemic. It's also AI. It's also the influence of other technologies, other global trends and changes. And as a result of all of that, the problems that we as an industry are looking to solve are more complex and they're ever evolving. And that means for us as a hospitality company that's been around almost 100 years, our leaders need to think and act differently. And we need to be really approaching the concept of leadership from a really different perspective than we have before. We know that our guests are looking for different experiences. They're looking for a holistic travel experience, not just necessarily a place where they stay for the night. They're looking for companies that match their values, that care about their communities, that are working differently, that are really focused on environment or social goals. At the same time, we know our associates are looking for different things as well. So we have new generations in the workforce that are looking for employers that are going to invest in them holistically, that are going to see them as humans beyond the output they create. And they're looking for a lot more flexibility, both in terms of their day-to-day work, but also what that means in terms of their career growth. So if you could go to the next slide, sort of sitting in that environment, we as a company have really rethought how we are thinking about the employee experience at Marriott. And we've been really grounded in this concept of be, that everyone who walks in our doors deserves a career that fulfills them and deserves to be able to begin their career with confidence at Marriott, to feel like they belong here and that they can become who they want to be. So on the next slide, you can see how we thought about that from an HR strategy. So we really thought that there were 3 key components that we needed to focus on as an HR discipline that would enable us to live by that promise of begin, belong, and become. The first was growing great leaders. This idea that if we get leadership right, everything else falls in place, that leaders are the linchpin to our effectiveness as an organization. Requires us to really invest in our associates and think about the whole person and provide access to opportunity. So on the next slide, I want to drill down a little bit into the idea of growing great leaders. We have really thought about this from the lens of how can we create empowered leaders at all levels. And getting back to the point that Matt made earlier, this concept of the importance of really looking at leadership development from wherever you sit in the organization and not just focusing at the top. So there are 2 things that we really took from this. One is reframing our whole approach to leadership and our framework about how we think about leadership, and then creating a foundational leadership program. And I'll talk a little bit about both of those as we go through. So on the next slide, we talk a little bit about the leadership framework. And the way we thought about this was breaking down what you can see here as the leadership essentials and leadership skills. So leadership essentials are, what is our expectation for all associates at all levels? And these we see really as the mindsets that underpin leadership from wherever you sit. And these are things that apply in the workplace, but also things that can help our associates as they go outside of our doors as well. So 3 key components. One is to be curious, to really to ask questions, to don't assume that you know all the answers, to think about what different possibilities could be. The second is to be courageous, to take risks, to try something new, to not be held back by the way we've always done things before. And the last is to be connected, to really see the value of each of us as humans. I think as we get into this increasingly technologically focused world, we as a hospitality company are obviously founded on the idea of human to human connections. And so how can we live that with our guests, but also with each other? And then separately, we've thought about, so what does that mean in terms of skills and behaviors? And you can see in that green box on the top right, we really thought about what this looks like when we're looking at managers of others and above. And then we built a variety of programs to support that. So on the next slide, I can tell you a little bit more about what we were thinking about in terms of how we can really make the biggest difference on leadership levels. And as we did a deep dive into the research, what we saw was that in order to scale this leadership framework and to enable the greatest access to opportunity, the biggest audience that we wanted to meet was frontline leaders. So these are managers of our largely hourly workforce, the people who are managers for the first time. And in a lot of cases, these are franchise associates. So they work at a Marriott branded hotel, but they're actually not employed by us. They're employed by one of our franchise companies. So in order to do that, we faced a variety of barriers on the next slide. And some of the barriers we faced were that it's just really challenging for a lot of these associates to get up from their desk and participate in training. Oftentimes we have, let's say, for example, a front desk manager. If someone calls out of the front desk, they have to step in. If there's a big group that's checking in, they might have to step in. So it's really hard to get people away from their desks. We have a global workforce. We're in over 130 countries around the world in practically every world language. So we have a variety of different challenges to getting the same kinds of materials and content and ideas out in front of people. Also, we are a human-centered workplace. So it requires training to be social, collaborative, and really focused on what this means to be going through this journey together. Also, prior to pulling this leadership framework and these programs together, we had kind of been meeting our needs in leadership development through a patchwork approach by identifying specific vendor programs that we liked or other different options, but we weren't able to reach the type of scale that we needed. Leah, I see a question in the Q&A about how do we balance Marriott expectations with the needs of each brand, and that is a huge challenge for us also. And I think, like, traditionally we have some brands that are really have a long history of leadership training and others that have less so. And what was really important to us here was making sure that it was the same. You know, if you're a manager at a Ritz-Carlton, we believe that what it takes to be an effective manager is to be an effective leader of others is really the same as what it would take at a Courtyard or a Fairfield Inn. There is sort of separate from that, we do brand specific training that helps each brand understand its unique positioning and what that difference might look like. But ultimately, and I'll talk a little bit more about what content we cover, but we believe that, you know, giving feedback needs to be the same. We believe that delegating needs to be the same. So it's sort of trying to tease out what are those key expectations that are true across the board versus what are more brand specific. Next slide, please. So as we were looking at what are the challenges that our leaders are facing, you know, I talked at the beginning, high level, that everything is, the world is changing so rapidly. There are also just complex labor challenges that our leaders are facing now. Obviously with attracting, hiring, retaining, career expectations, and also this real focus on emotional intelligence being a totally different perspective. John, to answer your question, I don't have the number in front of me, but I believe it's in the order of magnitude of about 100,000. And again, that's both our direct employees as well as franchise employees. Okay, next slide. So with that, we really looked at how can we build a program that provides differentiated leadership learning at each different level. The first two programs which we launched this year are Embark and Envision. These are for first-time managers, so those frontline leaders. And then We are currently building and planning to release additional programs for department heads, so managers of managers, and then other future leadership levels. And when we were thinking about this, we really thought about what was needed. Embark, we see really as the sort of emergency toolkit for when people first get promoted into leadership roles. So Matt, you can go to the next slide and I can talk a little bit about these two programs. So Embark is that, like I said, emergency toolkit. We focus on things like delegation, prioritization, engagement, feedback, team collaboration. So some of those really core things that you need when you first start to manage someone. And then Envision, we have for folks to take about a year after they've been in role. And this is a little bit more complicated and team building focus. So we look at delivering results. How do you lead with purpose? How do you lead through changes? How do you think about the different stakeholders in your world? How do you develop others through coaching and really think about developing the leadership and not just building someone's skill set? And then lastly, how do you create a sense of belonging on your team? To answer Sandy's question, these are for newly hired experienced managers as well as internally promoted. Right now, these programs are recommended. They're not necessarily required. There's some caveats to that, and obviously it's more complicated than I'm saying, but in general, we are trying to put all of our managers through these programs, including newly hired experienced managers. That said, I think our eventual vision would be a world where there's more of an assessment at the front end to get a sense of people's skills and which program makes the most sense for them. I will say, and I'll talk a little bit more about the peer collaboration piece, even if all the content is old news to someone, we found that these programs are hugely helpful because of the ways that they can really take it to the next level and have that peer collaboration. So I want to dive in a little bit on the next slide into the core components of the program. We have, as we were thinking about the program, we really wanted something different. Now, to get to scale, we could no longer do, 3-day in-person events with nicely catered lunches, as much as that is what we would all love. We had to look at something that was virtual. And we also really wanted to take advantage of the opportunity that blended learning provided. Yes, David, exactly this question. Thank you for asking. So we really looked at a couple different components. The first was these virtual instructor-led modules, and each program, both Embark and Envision, have 3 2-hour instructor-led modules, and those are pretty typical VILTs. We have cohorts of 30. They are highly experiential, very practice-oriented, activity-focused. What we really love about it, though, is the program goes way beyond those 3 core modules. So we have this concept of learning circles. They meet their learning circles actually before the course. Learning circles are groups of 6 within that 30-person cohort. And they meet their learning circle on novoed prior to starting the program. And then they work closely with their learning circle throughout the program. So in the module, in the VILTs, they actually go to breakout rooms with their learning circle every time. In addition to that, we have 2 1-hour learning circle calls in between each of the 3 sessions, where it's a full hour and they are completely self-led, completely self-governed. I'll talk about that a little bit more in just a minute, but the learning circles are really designed to be an opportunity for them to share with each other, to learn, and also to test out and try out some of these activities. And then the last component, David, to your question, is learning in the space of work. And this really focuses on, okay, we talked about giving feedback, now go give feedback. Go out, use this model, go give feedback to someone on your team, and then come back and talk about what that looked like. So I want to actually turn it over to Jacob for a minute to talk a little bit about novoed, because as I'll talk about more, there's no way we could do any of these components without novoed.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Katie. Matt, can we go to the next slide, please? So when thinking about learning in general and the transformation that a lot of L&D organizations like Katie's have gone through, really it strikes me that it happened in four different phases, both in terms of what the priorities were and how it incorporated technology. And it really seems like Marriott is right there at the top of the maturity curve. And we're going to talk about a little bit more of what they're doing. The first historically, right, and with this for those of you who've been around for a long time, probably goes back to the 80s, is just the move, or even the 90s, is just the move to going digital, the move to transition curricula into SCORM, into digital learning, into e-learning, and making that accessible. But as it turns out, that investment doesn't really change employee behavior, and employees don't really like it. It's not interactive. It's not engaging. It doesn't incorporate those elements of classroom instruction that are what we know are really effective in helping people grow and learn and change. The next question that emerged was, well, we just don't have enough content. So then there was this emergence of all of the different content companies, right, that allow you to buy often very good off-the-shelf content, but low relevancy, high volume content doesn't really drive performance readiness or change either. Now, the response about, let's call it 5-10 years ago, was enabling specific employees to become their own CLO, right? That was what was being set out in industry, and that was all about personalization. The idea was, if I get you the right information at the right time at the right place, that's going to do the trick. But personalized discovery of generic information still doesn't make e-learning effective. Like, even though it's higher relevance, the underlying modality doesn't drive the outcomes that organizations and people need and that companies are trying to achieve. Because ultimately, if you're trying to actually move a culture or upskill a large number of people, train a large number of people, enable them to be successful day to day on the job, you can't have a system where only the most engaged and motivated people who have like a experiment and ownership mindset, where they hear something and they go try it and they work hard to apply it, and they're doing this by themselves without guidance, without instruction. That's not a model that can really work at an organization that has complexity, large teams, lots of different people involved, and where performance and performance readiness at scale are important. An organization like Marriott has, well, what is it that you said before, Katie? Over 1.4 million employees, is that right?
We have slightly less. It's the number changes all the time. I think it's around 900,000 that
Okay.
wear our name badge. So some of them are Marriott employees, many are franchise.
Okay, got it. Thank you so much. So about 900,000 employees. So with that kind of operational scale and volume, even if you delivered the most relevant thing to every single person at every moment, that's not going to create a sufficiently homogeneous outcome, because you need people to not just be ready, you need them to be the same level of ready, or at some specific baseline of readiness and performance, and you need that to be sustained across a large global organization. So right now, the move is towards specific learning aligned with strategic priorities. And in order to drive that uniform performance readiness and that uniformity of outcome and that quality of learning for the learner, these kinds of experiences, like what Katie is building, incorporate practice and application, peer learning, feedback, activities, and the focus is on capability development that drives strategic workforce transformation, that actually enables people to, and really what that means is learning that relates specifically to a company's inherent strategic objectives, and making sure that the workforce is prepared and equipped to drive those objectives and to get there. Matt, next slide, please. So what we see happening is this move from traditional through self-directed learning into capability academies, which are often business unit led, social and collaborative, focused on strategic content, deliver learning on an ongoing basis. Like Katie said, in their integrated leadership development framework, it's across the entire employee experience from you first join Marriott to if you stay there for 30-40 years and become a very senior leader. It's focused on application and impact, and analyzing the actual impact that's happening on the job for specific concrete employees. And the learning is contextual. So as Marriott, as Katie shared, they have a whole portfolio of different programs that are contextually dependent on that specific employee's obligations, context, the role in the organization. And it's tailored very intricately to their needs and how much time they have for learning and the goals that the organization has to get from that learning. So now we're going to jump back over to Katie, and we're going to talk a little bit about what exactly that looks like. Katie?
Thanks, Jacob. So I wanted to go a little bit deep into how this works, because it looks pretty different from anything that we had seen before, and it's been, like I said, we launched in January, and we've been so far extremely successful. So the first thing is this real approach on blended cohort learning. One of the things that we really love about this program is our ability to have a templatized cohort experience so that it can be replicated all over the world. So I said we have cohorts of 30. They feel really close knit, but we're able to create that template that can be used consistently globally. And it is a real learning journey. They go through with discussions, they submit assignments, they do video practice. I mentioned earlier that the learning circles meet actually before the class starts. They do video introductions and they can comment on each other's introductions. They start that collaboration from the very beginning. And they're able to do this with a real community of their peers. So on the next slide, I want to dive a little bit deeper into the virtual instructor-led modules. So like I said, these are pretty similar to before, but we dive into these virtual instructor-led sessions. The virtual instructor-led sessions have pre-work and post-work in novoed. And one of the things that's been really valuable for us with novoed is all of this is automated. So if someone's falling behind, if they're not doing the assignments they're supposed to do, novoed, it's automated. So novoed will automatically send them reminders and hold people accountable. They also have certain things that are required and other things that are optional. So things that are required, they don't get completion credit until they've actually finished those assignments. So on the next slide, we talk about my favorite part, which is the learning circles. Learning circles are a space for the groups to really collaborate with a smaller group of peers. And they do that synchronously in those classes as well as asynchronously on the platform. I got a question in the chat about, are those learning circles global? We run these programs by continent and by language. So for example, US Canada is one of our continents. They run consistent programs. The way that it works is it's open sign up. And so you'll sign up for a specific time slot that you want those live VILTs to be, and then you'll be put into a cohort based on that. So in US Canada, your cohort would be people from all over the US and Canada. Another one of our continents is APEC, which is Asia Pacific excluding China. You could be with people from all over that continent, same with Europe, Middle East, and Africa. We are currently delivering in 14 languages. So obviously we have, for example, we're delivering in Spanish across Caribbean and Latin America, and it will be people from over that whole region. One of the things that I've really loved about the learning circles is a couple things. One is, one of the biggest pieces of feedback we had, positive feedback we had about our leadership development programs pre-COVID, was that, I made relationships that lasted throughout my whole career. And we said, that's great. How'd you do that? Well, the session was interesting, and then we all went to the bar. And so obviously we can't all go to the bar in a virtual session. And it is harder, because we are humans, to build that kind of relationship online. The learning circles has been a really great way to jumpstart those relationships, because they connect consistently, and we are asking really, we're forcing people to be vulnerable, to take risks, to try on new things. It's also a really great place where people can form close relationships and people that they can go back to later. And we've actually heard, like I said, we only launched these programs in January, but we've been hearing pretty consistently that the learning circles have been hugely helpful and been one of the best parts of the whole program. And there's lots of instances of people still meeting in their learning circles. The other thing I really like about the learning circles is it forces a sense of responsibility. Like I said, they're totally self-led, self-managed. And pretty consistently, what will happen is after the first learning circle, someone will go to the facilitator and say, half the people in my learning circle didn't turn on their cameras, or I'm in a learning circle of 6 people and 4 of them didn't speak the whole time. And our response in each of those moments is, this is a great opportunity for you to practice leadership. This is the space where you can practice taking that on, trying something new, trying to make this work, figuring out how to get people to do something that they may not want to do, or that may be hard, figuring out what those barriers are. So they've been really exciting and really successful. It's not perfect. It is definitely not, we're not solving all problems. And there are lots of learning circles where people still don't show up with their cameras on or don't participate. But we are starting to see some real behavior shifts and culture change as we are moving forward. So David's question, cohort creation. So what I would say is we are a lot less focused on, you have to start within a certain amount of time, so much as we are on, you have to embark within your first 6 months. And so what has been really helpful for us is we advertise in our LMS when these courses are available, and people sign up through our LMS for the next course that works for them. In general, our continents run them differently because our facilitators are come directly from our continent teams. So each has chosen their own approach, but generally they go in waves. So I would say we do a wave of 10 or 15 classes at one point, and then 6 weeks later, we start the next wave. Okay. I love learning circles. I could talk about them forever, but I do want to move on to the last piece, which is the next slide, which is assignments completed on the job. And really, this is the piece that for me was the most important. And I think David asked a question about this before, that, and it gets to Jacob's point as well, that application is what makes learning valuable. There's, we know that the vast majority of what people learn in a classroom leaves their head after they leave the classroom. And so one of the things that was really important to us in designing this program was ensuring that people could take the work that they did back to their day-to-day jobs. So one thing that we have as an example is for our delivering results section, we ask people to come up with a purpose. And actually, if you go to the next slide, you can see an example of one. So we talk a lot about creating a team purpose and looking at taking the company purpose or your brand's purpose and making that into your specific team's purpose. So you can see here what an experience that we took them through. So we taught the concept in class. We then had them brainstorm different ideas. They had to write into novoed the different ideas that they had, and talk to their manager, some of their peers, their teams. And then in their learning circles, they helped each other workshop their team purpose and come up with these final documents. And so you can see at the bottom, the team's purpose to ensure each guest's treatment is individualized, and on and on. And so they really thought about this. And then as a learning circle, they thought about, okay, what are the ways that you can make this active? And what might that look like for us to really take this forward and have our team purpose be a part of our day-to-day life? They each came up with ideas. And then they have to, in novoed, report on, here's what I did, here's how it went. And within the learning circle, they give each other feedback. Next slide, please. So we've been running this for several months. We've had over 7,000 participants so far. I think I pulled this data a few weeks ago, so it is now out of date. But like I said earlier, our plan is to have probably about 15,000 people go through these 2 programs this year. And again, it is completely global. One of the other things that I really like about this program, about using novoed, but also what we're doing is we're really trying to look beyond just completion data and look at behavioral outcomes. So we have we have about 25 questions, about 12 to 13 per program that we ask in pre and post surveys. So they rate themselves in a score of 1 to 10 on these questions prior to taking the course, and then they rate themselves again at the end of the course. So as you can see here, one example is I know all the stakeholders I need to consider when doing my work. Before, people rated themselves an 8.3 out of 10, and after the course, they rated themselves a 9.3, 9.4. And so this is really helpful. I'm sure many of you struggle with showing the ROI on leadership training and helping to demonstrate to business leaders how important it is to take time, particularly when we're looking at that frontline leader level. And these changes have enabled us to have some real data that says, you know, look, these programs are really having an impact. We just started doing this measurement, and we did some baseline business impact assessments this year. So starting next year, we're really hoping to be able to pull more data on the impact that these programs have on business outputs. So specifically, we're looking at retention levels, we're looking at guest satisfaction, and we're looking at results that come out of our associate engagement survey. John, your question, did the managers provide any observable feedback? That's a great question. So I will say that not the way we have the program structured, but it is novoed has the capability to do that. It is logistically hard for us to make that happen. A lot of that because of the fact that many of these associates aren't part of our actual organization. And so we don't necessarily all have, we don't always have that information. So we currently don't have a system set up to do that. That said, I mentioned earlier that we're planning these additional 3 programs, Evolve, Elevate, and Empower. And we are looking at, are there ways that we can make that connection a little bit more clear? Okay, next slide. Awesome. So just wanted to close off with a real quick where we are and where we're going. So far this year, we've introduced our leadership essentials and the leadership framework, which we talked about before, and we launched all of these programs across all of our continents. The rest of this year and into next year, we're building out additional programs. So I talked about Evolve. We are knee deep in building out Evolve. I'm really excited about this program. We're going super deep into emotional intelligence and looking at how can you really build empathy and self-awareness. So we're doing some really cool things in that space. And we're also looking at how we can expand this leadership cohort learning approach across new audiences, and particularly going below the frontline leader audience down to our hourly associates and frontline employees. So there's a whole host of other challenges that come into play when we get there. I forget if I said this earlier, but that audience tends to be, we have a lot less technology competence and awareness. We also have literacy challenges at that level. So thinking through exactly how we make that work is going to be interesting, but we are doing that. Jamie, to your question, yes. So we do measure by manager. So we are able to see that at each manager level, but only if managers have a minimum of 5 direct reports or 5 people below them in the hierarchy, either director or further down. So we're not going to be able to get a 1-to-1, but we will be able to get data for enough of our audience that we can draw some connections. Okay.
All right. I think I'll jump in here. Matt, next slide, please. Before we jump into Q&A, and I've been writing down everyone's questions in the chat, so we're gonna go over those in a second. I just wanted to speak about what I think is really interesting on Marriott's work in context against other similar organizations. So there are obviously a variety of different approaches towards online social and collaborative learning. And most companies, most organizations are kind of down in that lower left-hand corner. They're around self-paced and normal blended learning with things like peer interaction and checkpoints, which is really good if you're doing simple training or some kind of core upskilling work. But when you start incorporating these elements of practice, feedback, application, subject matter expert participation in the form of Marriott's trainers and teachers and instructors and discussion, as well as team-based learning and team collaboration, like those group assignments that they shared. That's really where you're able to start using digital modalities to achieve these kinds of complex workforce transformation that a lot of learning organizations are now being tasked with helping to drive. So it's not to say that this is totally unique to novoed, but it's critical to have this integrated, holistic approach if you're setting complex, holistic goals for yourself in your learning and your talent development strategy. I think now's a good time for us to jump into Q&A. I wrote some questions down, but I'm sure Matt, you did also. Matt, please take it away. And we can go to the next slide. We can go to the conclusion.
Actually,
Yeah.
I think Katie has been on it. So believe it or not, I think she's actually answered every question that we've pulled in so far. What other questions might you folks have for Katie this afternoon, or Jacob for that matter?
Yeah, so I've written
I
down a
think
couple that I think I saw in chat. Are learning circles global?
Yes. So the learning circles are global, but like I mentioned earlier, it's done by continent and by language. So
Yeah.
our Chinese learning circles tend to be just in China. But our other learning circles, again, depending on the continent, differ. And I know there was a question at one point around who facilitates this content, and I think, Jacob, I saw that you answered. The content's all facilitated by Marriott internally. We have a variety of different continent level facilitators that facilitate the content and lead this program. So, and to be totally honest, that was a huge shift for us as well. These are people who have been facilitating content in person sessions for the last many years, for their whole careers. And we asked them to switch not just to virtual, but also to virtual leveraging a platform. And it was a huge change management. Actually, I would say the biggest change management effort that we had was figuring out how to enable our facilitators to feel really confident in that approach.
And how do you integrate newly hired experienced managers who have previous experience into these programs? Or are these programs only for internally promoted personnel?
It's both. We're still working on it. So I will say that it has been it's been interesting. And I think that one of my big learnings is that I thought it was going to be a lot easier for people to figure out where they should fit in than it has been. I thought if I gave people a sheet which said, go to this training if you want to focus on these 5 topics, and go to this other one if you want to focus on those topics. And that was way more complicated for our associates than I had anticipated. And so we're exploring how we want to give more guidance. Right now, I think like my general recommendation is that because of the peer collaboration and because of the ways that they're able to apply it at work, I think these programs are useful even if you already know everything, even if you are an experienced manager.
So Katie, there's a question in chat also. From a technical perspective, how does novoed integrate into Marriott's overall LMS or HRMS? Really interested on how a learner's journey is visible as they move through the organization.
That is a great question that I will say we don't have a good answer to, not because of novoed. Novoed could do it just fine, but our LMS is complicated. And so we haven't yet figured out the right integration approach. Right now it is manual. So people sign up for the course through our LMS. We download that list, upload it into novoed. They go through everything in novoed. Novoed has automatic completion criteria. So as soon as they we close the course. We close the course about 2 weeks after the last VILT to give them time to wrap some things up. And then anyone who has completed the course gets a certificate, and then we like write that information back to our LMS. And I noticed, Jamie, you had a question here which is related about certification strategy and how long it takes to go from registration to completion. So you register, and then then you have about 2 weeks of pre-work before the first class. Each continent does it a little bit differently, but then that's about 5 weeks of those courses, both the VILTs and the learning circles, and then let's say about a week. So all like front to end is about 2 months. And again, it's a little bit different. It is self-sign up, but it's only available to managers of others. So it is not right now being used as a way for people who aspire to management roles to move into management roles. That's one of the things that we're looking at right now. We are looking at how we can think about leveraging the completion. And this is actually more of a LMS HRIS system question that we are trying to manage, of how do we integrate our like holistic talent planning approach. But we're working on it. And Judy, to your question, we develop almost entirely all of our own learning content. We pull resources and videos where we can find them, but mostly it is us, and that is mostly because as I was saying to Matt earlier, my secret goal in life is to design curriculum because I really love it. And so we build a lot of our own things internally. Also, because it's hugely important to our program. It's not just because of me, I promise.
And Katie, I have a question for you. When you're thinking about human development, people development more broadly, not just in terms of growing good and effective leaders, where do you see your and Marriott's role in how you are supporting your employees more broadly, not just on their professional journeys, but also on their personal journeys?
Yeah, I think that's really where those 3 B's come in for us: the be curious, be courageous, be connected. And really thinking that, ultimately, when we talk about leadership, we are really trying to shift the conversation internally away from leadership being a title to leadership being a verb. Leadership is an action that anyone can take, anything can do. And it's really focused on how can we support anyone wherever they are in their job, at home, to embody those behaviors of leadership, whatever that looks like. And it's really interesting. I had a family meeting last weekend with my kids who are 9 and 11, and we had be curious, be courageous, be connected as kind of our guideposts for how we wanted to be together as a family. And so I think like one of the things that's really clear to us is giving people real tangible work examples of what this looks like, but with the intention of how we can help people build those skills for success throughout their lives.
All right. Matt, I think in just a second, we're going to wrap up. I also wanted to quickly say in chat, David asked, I want to just make sure I get the question correctly. How do you create a rolling cohort for a program that is auto-assigned at day 1 and is weighted heavily with self-paced content up front? I wanted to quickly respond to that. So David, it depends on the volume of hiring, but if you have enough employees to form together a cohort, you can start. I mean, we have some organizations that do cohorts that launch several times per day when they're very, very big. I mean, there are some organizations that run what would be tens of thousands of programs per year, some. So if you have unified org level onboarding, that's one question. If you have specialized onboarding across lines, across different functions, across different levels in the organizations, typically the way that I would organize that, the way that I would structure that is by using learning journeys, where you start everyone together in one kind of company level experience. And then it gets more and more differentiated by function and title and business line and so on as you work through. And those different sections can be optimized for different amounts of socialization and peer interaction and touch points and mentor and manager participation and so on, based on the nuances of the situation. But there are different ways to do it. Some just have one overall company onboarding, and then their business lines are responsible for their own stuff. So it's something worth further exploration for sure. All right, Matt, back to you.
Great. I did catch one other question that I don't know that we touched on. So real quickly, Katie, Tomer asks, how do you integrate your hiring process with leadership development? Are you assessing the same competencies in both hiring and development? How does Marriott's employee value proposition contribute to those initiatives?
Yeah. So short answer is we use the same competencies across all three stages. So hiring, recruitment and hiring, performance management, and leadership development. So those things are aligned. I think now that we've launched the new leadership framework, we're really thinking about what that means at a deeper level and trying to take it a step further. We also, in terms of the employee value proposition, so some of the slides that I showed earlier with the information about the Marriott Be campaign, and this idea of you can become whoever you want to be here is really, I think, the key piece that we're trying to flow through here. And this idea of begin, belong, become. And so I would say it's all part and parcel of the same initiative, and we're starting. I think we've done some really cool things so far, but we're definitely really early in that journey.
Excellent. We want to thank everyone for joining us this afternoon. What a great time and a great audience. We appreciate your questions, your thoughtful comments. As a reminder, you will be getting a link to the recording as well as a copy of the presentation within a couple of hours. It takes Zoom a little bit to process those recordings. And again, we thank you for your time. Have a great rest of your day and week, folks.